Welcome to the conversation. I'm Paul Grondahl, the director of the New York State Writers Institute at the University of Albany. I'm really honored with our guests today. We have Alice Green, Dr. Alice Green, founder of the Center for Law and Justice in Albany, a longtime activist on the scene, an author, and an educator. And on the phone, we have Leon Van Dyke, one of the founding members of the Brothers, an important, vital voice for the African-American community and the underserved communities of Albany in the 1960s. He's also a teacher, a professor, and a commentator. Welcome, Alice and Leon.
Thank you.
So I wanted to start with both of you because you have a broad perspective. You've been on the front lines of this fight against injustice and racism since the 1960s. I'll start with Alice. Does this feel at all like, you know, the work you were doing in the south end of Albany in the 1960s and involving with Leon and the Brothers? Is there any similarities?
Does today?
Yeah, or what's been going on this week?
Yeah, you know what? I was thinking about that earlier. I was down in the south end on Saturday evening.
Yep.
When things were happening. Some call it a riot. I call it an uprising.
Mm-hmm.
But it reminded me of 1968, April 5th, I think it was, when Martin Luther King was assassinated. And I arrived in Washington, D.C. to see the cherry blossom because I'd never been there. Right. And when I got off the bus, I saw the same scene that I saw on Saturday in the South End. I mean, people were running around. You know, there was, people were getting teary-eyed from all the smoke and everything was going on. But the important thing is that the reason why I say it was an uprising is that people were expressing their concerns about how they have been treated in this country for, you know, hundreds of years since the enslavement period. And so when people were calling it a riot, it didn't sound right to me because they were expressing their fears, their disappointment, their anger at this country. And I saw the same thing happening on Saturday in the South End. People were expressing their anger over the way they have related to, or the way the police department has related to them over so many years. And I started to think, wow, have we really had any change here in this country? That's sort of, I made that connection between that period and the current period and what was happening.
Right. Thank you. Leon, you were in the streets leading protests. There were times when people assaulted you and your young African-American brothers in the 1960s. Is this time and what's going on both in Albany and across New York State and the country feel at all like the 1960s?
Oh, yeah. In many respects, Alice was going in and out, so I missed a number of things that she said. But I think I caught the gist of it, and I would agree wholeheartedly with her, those sentiments that I understood that she expressed. The other thing is, I think what we're seeing, and I totally agree in terms of, I would not describe the vandalism that we see is taking place for the most part on the screens today, and the looting as a riot. I think what we're seeing is justifiable outrage of what we're seeing, the lynching, that's what I call it, that we've seen of Mr. Floyd. And I think that when you compile that with what took place case with the young woman that was shot 8 times in Louisville, and the young jogger, and then 400 years of this kind of mistreatment and injustice is justifiable rage. It's unfortunate that some of the young people who we see broke some windows, but I'm not quite sure, in all honesty, that when you see it, it's not justified. I was just looking at the autopsy report, and there is a contradiction between the private pathologists who did the examination of the cause of death and the county, Minneapolis County report of the difference. And I think it only leads to the mistrust, and once again, the justifiable mistrust of the system doing the right thing. So,
right.
these contradictions that we see between official reports, not just in this case, but this has been going on for 4 years.
Let's let Alice join in here.
No, I hope that we don't, a lot of people miss the symbolism that's here as well. And I've heard people refer to it with that particular photo that we were left with this police officer's knee on Mr. Floyd's neck. And people are saying that sort of symbolized the experience of African Americans in this country because white supremacy has operated in such a way as to cut off our breathing and our freedom kind of thing. And so people are making that connection. So, that's another reason, Leon, why I wouldn't call it a riot, because people were identifying with this very strongly. And they saw that as symbolic of our whole history in this country.
Right. I mean, particularly Alice, you've spent a big part of your career trying to work with the police department in Albany. Do you feel, I mean, this anger is directed at police for the most part in Minneapolis and many other cities, including many cases in Albany. Dante Ivey, Eleazar Williams, you were there, I was there at all those
Right.
protests. But have we made progress, or are we right back where we were when you started in 1968?
Well, obviously there's been some change, but when I look back and I did a whole long history earlier today, the history of policing in this country with, policing starting during a period of enslavement for the purpose of control and dehumanizing. And we see this continue, during even Reconstruction and Jim Crow, and also in Jim Crow racism, that police were used in the same kind of way, joining with Ku Klux Klan to basically strike the fear into everybody and to maintain that segregation that they thought was important. And it's gone, through the ages with the new Jim Crow, the old Jim Crow, the new Jim Crow, the dogs. You hear Trump talking about unleashing dogs on people because they were demonstrating. You see people we see mass incarceration as a result of the kind of policing that we've been doing. And it looks and feels a whole lot like enslavement. And so in some respects, there's been some changes, but we still are controlled by a system that is that sees African Americans as unhuman and judge them by stereotypes. We see them as being criminal or violent people, totally disregarding the violence that has come with the use of police throughout our history here, and it's been great, and it continues. That violence against Black people continues unabated. So yes, there's been a few changes, but by and large, we're still not too far from where we started, because white supremacists basically say that Black people need to be controlled. They need to be killed, and all of that. So, we got a long way to go before there is equity in this country, and young people are starting to realize it, as well as those of us who lived through that whole period, because Blacks have collective memory that's been handed down throughout the ages, and they're starting to say, this sounds a whole lot what I've been hearing about.
Thank you. Leon, what would you want to add? With the brothers, you had a long list of very specific demands to improve substandard housing in minority communities, job access for African-American workers, very specific. I'm wondering, other than this outrage at police abuse, do you get a sense of what this movement is asking for?
Well, I wasn't able to hear Alice's remarks, but unfortunately, but I sense a great change is going on. One of the people who are protesting, it appears to me that at least 50%, and some of my people that's been out in these protests, I said at least 75% of the people that are protesting are white. That's a big change. The other thing is that I see that something is blowing, as Bob Dylan said, blowing in the wind, is my daughter, she sent me a picture of, that I think I sent to you and Alice, of protesters, white protesters there was two lines standing in front of the Black protesters, in between the police and the protesters. And the other thing is that I saw something that was different and positive, that there was some police that were taking a knee.
Yes, we saw that.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think there's something that's going on, that not just Blacks, but whites also had enough of police abuse. And so I see that is very possible.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Liam. I don't quite agree that. Certainly, that was one of the things that stood out during the march on Saturday. There were a number of the people who were in that march were white, which was, we were happy to see that. And they can relate to that graphic, photo and video that we saw in Minnesota. However, we still have a long way to go for them to understand the systemic nature of racism. They oftentimes react to images like that, or to specific incidents of personal racism that's exhibited by police officers and others in the system, but they don't quite get it in terms of the systemic nature of racism, the things that happen that maintains the inequality in this country. I don't see them willing to give up anything, as white people have the power. They want to maintain it. Even good, nice people, don't get me wrong, but I don't think they're willing to give up a whole lot. We still have a very segregated society. We don't quite buy it, as white people don't quite buy into some of the things that we're calling for in terms of equity in the educational system, in employment. We're still operating to a great extent on stereotypes and treating people, Black people, differently. It might be subtle sometimes and you might not recognize it, but it's all there. And that's why we've been pushing the police department in Albany to start thinking about that. The training that they give to people. They don't understand, police officers don't understand the history of the relationship between Blacks and police officers. They think the anger is misplaced, that they shouldn't be doing some of the things that Black Lives Matter do to get their point across. So even though I'm hopeful, and there are, you're right, more whites I think are involved, but don't forget in the civil rights movement, they were there. They were there doing voter registration. They were there when a lot of them got killed in the South. So they've always been there, and sometimes particular segments like the Catholic Church, for instance, I think played a major role as well. So yeah, it's nice to see them. And I think like the other day, one of the things that might have happened is that people have been pent up for so long, in their homes, that this provided an opportunity to get out. It's something that they saw that was wrong, and it gave them an opportunity to socialize with people for a while, and I think that was part of it. So yeah, I do see some change, but unless you understand the systemic nature of racism, I don't see us getting that far ahead. We still have the highest rates of poverty, and school dropouts and all of that, and unequal funding of our public educational system.
Leon, would you want to?
I wish we could have this dialogue where I could hear all what you said.
I'm gonna stop talking. Leon, because you didn't hear me. How come you can't hear me?
I don't know why.
I got my speaker turned up.
Maybe it's my cell phone or something.
Do you hear me, Paul?
I can hear you loud and clear, Alice, but
okay.
We will figure out the technology next time. We apologize that Leon couldn't get on the video portion, but I guess what would be helpful or useful going forward? I know, Alice, you've been on so many police review boards and task forces and commissions, and Leon, what do you think would be helpful now, since we're at a very volatile sort of an impasse in a way between the police and the protesters? What would be helpful?
Well, there are a lot of specific things that one, as Alice said about the system, we have to address that. One of the things that I see in many of these various different kinds of reports is that the district attorney's office, and I think Cuomo pointed this out, because of the symbiotic relation that they have, there's a conflict between the district attorney who has to work with the police in dealing with crimes, but they should not be the ones that when the police are accused of abuse, they should not be the ones investigating, because there's a conflict of interest. And maybe you got to take that part out and have an independent party look at that.
That's what Cuomo has suggested.
But to get them to the point of where we sit down, legitimate stakeholders sit down and talk about, I think, about reform of what needs to be reformed. I think that these protests that we're seeing, that seems to be not just black protests against it, but whites also protesting, is that we had to bring them to the table. And I think the protests are going to do that.
Yeah, I hope you're right. But I want to point out that the Center for Law and Justice, one of the things we've been doing, we've been having this running discussion on the internet, dialogue on the internet we picked out 4 key government officials to address a number of issues around systemic racism. That included the DA's office, the mayor's office, the police chief, and the president of the Common Council. And we've been asking them questions. We've been posting their responses. We've been doing follow-up questions. And we are asking them to participate in this fall symposium that will take all of this information that we're gathering from what they're saying and try to talk about systemic racism, what it looks like, how is it being perpetuated in the police department, and what should real community policing look like, and the relationship between the community and the police. How is that changing, if it is? The police say that it's changing. The chief said, he has a great relationship with the community, but we've said to them, the community doesn't trust you, so we better stop. We better pull back and figure out what we need to do to fix that. But they're just denying that the relationship is poor. And expressing shock, as I said before, that people were out there protesting and doing what they saw was quite violent behavior. So I think we got a long ways to go. We have already presented them with a list of recommendations of what they could do. And
also have to negotiate from a position of power.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's Leon. Yep.
Yeah, I think that you got to negotiate from a position of power, and you have to seek out allies wherever you can get them.
Mm-hmm.
Just a matter of just a few select of us sitting with the police and say, "Oh, will you do this? Will you do this?" When we have nothing, we have no power, and so we have to seek out allies.
Oh yes, I agree.
That for allies, Obama wouldn't have been elected. So we have to seek our allies where we can. And if in the Second World War, if the United States and Russia can become allies to defeat the Germans, why can't we seek those allies who at least give some lip service who want to support us? So, I don't know how we're going to do it alone.
But let me follow up with Alice. It seems like you're talking about a vacuum of leadership, because for the first time that I believe in Albany history, you have an African-American police chief, an African-American district attorney, and an African-American common council president. But you're saying they're not really in sync with the African-American community in Albany, it sounds like.
I don't think they are. And that's the point that I make over and over again. Just because you have an African-American chief, which is fine if they bring some leadership. But if you're talking about real change, transformative change, you've got to deal with that issue of systemic racism. Because if we go out and recruit all these Black police officers, if they go into a system that does not respect Black people or stereotype Black people, or think they have to treat Black people differently in the community, then you haven't really gotten anywhere, okay? So it's not just, we're not talking about individuals. They're very nice police officers. I work with them all the time, and I think they're fantastic. But that's not what we're talking about. In Minnesota, if they get rid of the person who is now charged with the murder of George Floyd, that is not necessarily going to change the way the department operates. You've got to make sure that you're doing something that's transformative, that certainly treats everybody equally. And if you're not doing that, you're just changing, the personnel. To me, it's not change at all. Okay, right. You can't put somebody into a bad system and expect them to be different. Right now, a lot of the Black police officers who work in the department are complaining. They're saying we're not being promoted like other people are. we're not being treated. I mean, we hear all of these racial epithets that people come up with inside the department. See, so the department hasn't changed if you're going to just seek out ways to control Black people. So that's what I'm talking about. Yes, we love to bring everybody into this whole discussion. That's what we're trying to do. That's why we have all this information on our website. That's why we're asking for comments and involvement of people. Because I agree with you, Leon. You know, you gotta have some power behind you, and somebody has to recognize it.
What would you want to add, Leon? And then I'm going to let Alice has been doing interviews all day. I appreciate the time she's given us, but did you want to add anything, Leon? How do you bring power to this conversation and get at these systemic issues of racism that Alice is talking about?
Yeah, well, I think you do that by recognizing, one, the people who are making some attempts, like the white people who joined the protest, some of the people who we mentioned, the policemen who are kneeling. You try to reinforce that behavior. I think that's one of the things. And it gives you some leverage at the negotiation table that you ordinarily wouldn't have when it's just a few organizations or a few people who don't appear, you know, I mean,
But Leon,
yeah.
people with power don't give it up.
Broke off or something. Go ahead, Alice.
Oh, people with power don't give it up. I mean, you got to figure out how to take it away. And you can sit there and negotiate all day, but it's not going to lead to transformative change.
Well,
that's why we're trying to get everybody in the city to recognize this and to make some demands in order for those changes to take place. I mean, it's taken us a long time just to get the department.
And you have to seek out your ally. You have to seek out allies wherever you get them, whether you get them Black, brown, red people, or white people. Whoever appears to want to support you, then you use that. But you don't reject them, I don't think. You don't
I don't think, we're not talking about rejecting them.
That their involvement is meaningless. How do you do that? I mean, sure, there's a number of people aren't going as far as we would like them to go, but as long as they're going in, they're supporting us, and I think he used that, Alex.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you, but the changes that we've made, we've had to push to get them.
Who sort of dismiss the policemen taking a knee, or submit or dismiss the whites who have joined the protest movement, I think it's against our interests.
I'm not disagreeing with you there, Leon.
I think
I mean,
and about the need to build a coalition across a lot of sectors, but I apologize that we couldn't get you on the video, Leon, to be continued, but I like what Alice is talking about, and the Writers Institute likes to bring together a wide range of voices and these kinds of conversations, so maybe we can work on something for the fall. What is that you were talking about, Alice? Is it planned out yet, what you want to?
I want people to go to cflj.org to see what we've been doing. Okay. Every single week, we pose questions to those officials. Yep. We ask for their responses. But the thing that we're headed towards, and all of this, we're collecting all this data and information that we've gotten from them, and asking people in the community to comment and to join with us. And it will end up with a symposium in the fall that talks about the two things: systemic racism, what it looks like, and how do you change it, and community policing, because the city says we're committed to community policing, but the community says, I don't think you know what you're talking about when you talk about community policing. That's not our idea of community policing. You know, that you don't, transparency is important, and you're not doing that. That's why we call for repeal of 50A. Now it's starting to catch on, which would allow us to have information about police officers who abuse people, look at their disciplinary records so that we know who we're talking about. Look at Minnesota. The man who's accused of killing George had 19 complaints. I think it was 18 or 19 complaints against
19.
him, and nobody in the community knew it.
Right, right.
You know, I don't want that person in my community, policing people.
Yeah. So CFLJ.org, the Center for Law and Justice, Dr. Alice Green, the founder of the Center for Law and Justice, Leon Van Dyke, one of the founding members of the Brothers. Thank you very much for joining us on the conversation. Sorry you couldn't get on the video, Leon, but next time we'll get you together again.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Take care, Leon.